Hello, so maybe you've seen my latest videos here on the channel about geometry nodes. And we've looked at one thing, which is instancing. And I got a few questions here about geometry nodes and all of that, but I also got a question on one of my older videos here on the channel about animation nodes and about instancing in animation nodes and the whole performance aspect of it. So in this video, we're going to look at geometry nodes and animation nodes, and we're going to compare a few things. Maybe this sounds interesting to you. I hope you're excited, and we're going to jump right into Blender. All right, here I am in Blender 2.93 Alpha, and I do have the little blue circle on my mouse pointer so you can see where the mouse is. However, the screencast keys add-on is not working at the moment. That's what you get when you use alpha versions, but I will try and explain the keys that I'm typing. Probably not that interesting for this video anyway. So how about we get started and we set up our scene here. I don't need the stage, so I'm going to delete that. Maybe I'm also going to delete the lights so that we have a very clean setup here. Okay, we need the camera. Then we have this shader ball, and it consists of several other objects here. And I'm just going to merge all of that together so that we have a very simple scene to start with. So Control J joins the geometry together. So now this is all in one object. And we have it here. Let's maybe call it something. Let's call it ball. Okay, now, so first thing we have to talk about here, instancing. What is it? Well, you might know, maybe you don't know, but if you've used Blender before, I'm sure you do. There's two ways to copy objects, to duplicate objects. First, there's the Shift D way, and then there's the Alt D way. So what's the difference? Well, let me show you. I take this object, I go Shift D, and then I get a copy, and I can place it over here. I now have two objects in the outliner over here. And with the Shift D, I also copied the mesh data, which means they're independent objects now, completely independent. I can go in here, I can pick a vertex, I can move it, and it doesn't affect the original object at all. So we essentially have twice the amount of vertices in our scene now. So if you're thinking about rendering, the more vertices you have in your scene, the longer your render is going to take, because of course the rendering engine has to take more geometry into account. And it needs way more memory on the graphics card. So the alternative to this is if you take this and you hit Alt D, you get the same thing. You also get an object over here, another one in the outliner, but this object now shares its geometry, its mesh information, data with the original object. So they're both kind of linked to the same underlying data. And when you render this, Blender just has to give this one underlying data block to the graphics card. So it needs only half the amount of memory. Well, not because this is still in here, but let me just show you the difference. If I take a vertex here and move it, you can see this is both objects are using the same underlying mesh data. So if you're not planning on changing the mesh itself, maybe sculpting or changing something, then just use Alt D and you save some memory, and it's also faster to render. Okay, so these are the two ways to do this. Now let me just go back a little, maybe to this. Let me delete this guy and that guy. So now we know what the difference is. So now we have geometry nodes, and we know that we can set up a node tree to instance objects to points, right? We also have animation nodes, and we have the object instancer in the animation nodes. And now we should take a look at maybe the difference here. So shall we start? Let's start with geometry nodes. Okay, How do you instance an object in geometry nodes? First of all, you need geometry to place, or points in 3D space to place the object to. Well, I'm just gonna go add a plane, go into edit mode, move that over here, and then maybe just delete these 3 vertices. So I'm just left with this one single vertex over here. Now with this object that just has one vertex now selected, I'm gonna go to geometry nodes, create a new node tree, which adds this modifier over here. I'm sure you're already familiar with that because I've shown that in the previous tutorials. Now, how do we instance this object to that vertex? Well, we just need a point instance node, plug it in here, and tell geometry nodes which object to instance. Well, let's take this one. And since this object over here, which is called plane, only has one vertex, we get one copy. Now we can also go up here and enable statistics. And then we get this information over here. So currently our scene has 8 objects in it. 0 are selected. So we're interested in this number 8 over here. We're also interested in the vertices down here. One thing I want to do here is get rid of this subdiv modifier. Okay, so our object, our original object here has 11,000 vertices. And even though we have another copy here, we only have 11,000 vertices. Let me prove it to you. I take this object, which is plane. I go into edit mode, Shift A, single vertex, add a single vertex. If you don't have this option, this is part of the add mesh extra objects or something add-on, which comes with Blender. You just have to enable it. So let's add another vertex, and then we can move that vertex. It's just, where is it? This guy here, this little orange dot. Now we have 2 vertices, and if I go out of edit mode, we still only have 11,000 vertices, because that's how instancing works. So this would be the Alt-D way of copying objects. They're all sharing the same mesh data. Okay, so this is the good way to copy it. If you don't want to change the mesh, if you want to change the mesh, there's no other way. You have to have a real physical copy of the mesh. But if you just want a completely perfect clone and you're not planning on changing it, you want Alt-D and you want the point instancer from geometry nodes. Okay. Now this is already interesting here, because this is one object in the outliner. It's called plane. Maybe we should call it geometry node instances or something like that, so we know what it is. It's one object in the outliner, but we see 3 objects here. And also, if you notice over here, now it says we have 9 objects. So again, if I go into edit mode, Shift A single vertex, now we have 10 objects. So this is already kind of weird, because we only have 1 object here, but somehow in the background, Blender counts these instances as objects. This is important. Also, notice we still only have 11,000 vertices in this scene, because they're using the same mesh data. Okay, now how does this work with animation nodes? Just as a comparison. So let's delete this object with the 3 vertices. Let's go to animation nodes, create a new animation nodes node tree, and then we need instances. So how can we make some instances? Well, we could just add an object instancer. Which object do we want to instance? It's not working. Oh, I have to click this one. Okay, so we want to instance the ball, and we want, I don't know, 1 instance. Now they're at in the same location there, which you can see because of those like overlapping geometry artifacts that we get. So we have to move our copy a little bit over to the side. We want to move this over on the X. Now let's look at our scene here. So first of all, we have our original ball, And then we have this collection here that Animation Nodes creates for us, and it puts its instances in there. And you can see it created a real object here in the outliner. So this is already different. If I make 2 instances here, now I have 2 objects here in the outliner. Remember a few seconds ago we just had that one plain object in there with the vertices in it, and it counted the objects, but it didn't actually have objects in the outliner. Here we have objects in the outliner, and of course we have objects over here. So now we have 8. If I increase this, then we have 9. Also notice we only have 11,000 vertices, because these copies here, just like before, they're referencing the same underlying mesh data. But this already has an issue. So they're comparing the instancing here with animation nodes to geometry nodes is exactly this over here. Because Blender has to manage these objects here somehow, right? It has to take care of the data and visualizing these objects. So if we don't have 3 instances, what if we have 30,000 instances? Then we have 30,000 objects here in the outliner. And this is actually really a problem because it gets very, very slow. Okay? Now, before we go further, let's also check something else. Let's get rid of this animation nodes completely, so it's not being executed. Let's disable this so we don't see it. Now let's also look at something else, namely the array modifier, because this is quite bad, I have to say. Look at this. We have 4 copies now because of the array modifier on our object. It's just one object, the ball here. This is not, forget this, this is disabled now, right? So we have one object. Our entire scene has 6 objects because there's the camera and all that, but we have one ball object, and now we have 44,000 vertices. So if I increase the array modifier here, now we have 55,000 vertices. So compared to the other 2 ways of instancing objects, this is really not instancing anything. This is actually creating geometry, which is maybe good if you want to add another modifier underneath this one, and then, I don't know, maybe noise or displace or something. You have actual geometry to do that with. But if you would just want perfect copies all standing in one line, then the array modifier is actually pretty bad, because now we have to calculate 122,000 vertices. Now this is not a huge number for a graphics card or even for CPU rendering. You can have several millions of vertices, but you see where the problem is. If this is just one little asset in your entire scene, using the array modifier is not good. So I just wanted to show you that if you just have this sort of setup or requirement, don't use the array modifier. Use something else like geometry nodes or even animation nodes. Your videos are pieces of art, wall art. Print My Video extracts up to 20,000 frames from your video's timeline, compresses, aligns and enhances them, and even overlays the audio waveform, and carefully bends everything into a perfect circle. After they manually optimize and quality check each artwork, you can either download a high-resolution image file to print at home or at your favorite print shop, or they can hand the picture off to a professional printer near you for perfect prints with high-quality materials. Print My Video have printing partners all over the world to cut down on shipping costs, be environmentally friendly, and support local businesses. Any video can be printed and preserved for eternity. Your wedding, the best vacation ever, your favorite music video, anything goes. Head over to printmy.video and hang your own vibrant, beautiful, one-of-a-kind video print on the wall. Use the coupon code CHRISP at checkout to get 10% off. Let's go back and actually make like a grid of these objects so we can see how to do that in both ways, right? So maybe we go back to geometry nodes first of all. Now, how do we make a grid of these shader ball preview objects here? In geometry nodes, we need geometry. So if you think about it, there's really only one way to make a grid, which is to make a physical grid of vertices, and then we use geometry nodes to place this ball onto each vertex. So let's go Shift A, Mesh, Grid, and that gives us this object, and we have the settings down here. So now we have a 10 by 10 grid. Let me just go into edit mode, scale this up and see what that is exactly. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 vertices by 10 vertices. Okay, so this is exactly 100 instances. Perfect. Now we take this object, we give this object a new geometry nodes node tree, and then we just hit Shift A and we point instance the ball onto our geometry, which is the vertices. You can basically forget the edges and the faces in that grid. They are not relevant here. We're just looking at the vertices, the points. And now we have 100 of our little shader balls. Okay. If I go into edit mode again and I scale up my grid, I'm just scaling out the vertices of the grid, I get this. Now this is very fast, as you can see, but we have sort of a problem here, because what if we wanted to have 20 by 20 instead? There's really no way to do this now, because this object here without this geometry on it, so if I plug that in here, is this grid, and it's kind of, you know, there's no way to go. What if I wanted to go 15 by 5? The only really usable way to do this is to get rid of this completely, add another grid with 15 by 5. Okay, so now we have this grid, and then we can go to the modifiers, put on this geometry nodes modifier, and just use whatever geometry node it was, this one, that instances the object. Okay, so of course this is doable, but wouldn't it be nicer if we could just like plug in 15 by 5 and it would just update? And that's where we can go over to animation nodes. So let's get rid of this again and do something in animation nodes. Let's get rid of this grid. Okay. Now we go to animation nodes. We have this object instancer in here already, which is instancing the ball. That's good. Now we need a grid. Well, there's two ways to do this. First of all, there is a mesh generator grid, which actually does generate that same mesh with edges and faces, and of course the vertices. And we can use that, of course. Or, no, let me think about it. No, you know what? We're gonna go Shift A matrix, distribute, and then this also gives us a grid of points. And now we can instance. So we want it 10 by 10, right? And we have these vectors, which is the location of the final points in this grid. This is where we want to instance or move our instances to. And how many instances do we need? Well, this many. So it's not working because we have to switch on auto execution. And I also hit that group here. So here we go. Now we have 10 by 10. And of course we can make it a little bit wider and a little bit longer. And you can see we still only have 11,000 vertices. So no increase here. But now we have 107 objects and they're all in here. And this is really the big issue, because if you turn this up to 100 by 100 now, or even higher, then this is going to be so slow that I don't even know if my recording is going to work. Let's try it. I hope it doesn't crash. Okay, you can already see. I hope it's still recording. I'm waiting. Okay, now it's done. So now we have 100 by 100 objects. This is already kind of sluggish. Well, it's okay. This is okay. This is also still quite fast. But if you do 1000 by 1000, you can forget it. This is going to completely crash. Okay, so this is how we instance the objects with animation nodes, and we get real objects. And they are real objects. I mean, they're using the same mesh data, yes, but we can go in here and just pick one of them, this one, and move it around, because it's a real, it's really there. As long as this doesn't get executed, so if I switch this off now, I can just work with this now. If I switch it back on, and I have set to tree change, frame change, or property change. So if I change something in the tree here, maybe this, then this animation nodes node tree gets executed again, and of course then my changes are gone. But that's sort of also a big difference between the geometry nodes and the animation nodes way of instancing objects, right? So this is what we have here. I'm actually quite surprised that this is still kind of really fast, because in my tests, having 100 by 100 made this outliner here so slow that even just moving the mouse over here, it would like update every 2-3 seconds. But I think there is a problem here with having all of these objects in here. So now, naturally, what would be the perfect solution to do this? Well, to use the best of both worlds, right? We want to be able to change our X and Y divisions to modify the grid and maybe modify the width and the length here. And also we want to have that advantage of the geometry nodes, where we don't have 10,000 objects here in the outliner. Can we do that? Yes, we can. Before we go there, one thing though to note. I'm sure you've seen this before, because I've definitely talked about this in other tutorials. In animation nodes, you have this checkbox deep copy, and that's exactly the difference between the Alt D and the Shift D. Right now we have 11,000 vertices, so this would be the Alt D way of instancing. They're all using the same mesh data. If you check this deep copy, and I'm not going to click it now, then the mesh data is copied 10,000 times. Okay. So maybe you would use that if you plan on doing other things after animation nodes and you actually need the real geometry. So that's what the deep copy is for. So what do we need? We don't need an object instancer. You can delete that. And I already deleted it, and you can see now Blender is working hard to clean up the 10,000 objects in the outliner. So I guess we're just gonna have to wait. Well, you can see what the problem is, right? That's the problem. Now it's done. And all it had to do is delete all of these objects. So having a lot of objects in here is really not good. Cool. Now, let's think about this. We need geometry for geometry nodes. Right now, we don't have geometry. This just generates points in 3D space, but they're not geometry. Can we make geometry out of them? Yes. We can go to a mesh object output where we can plug in a mesh, and then we can do mesh, combine mesh, and here we can plug in the vertices, and then we can plug that in here, enable it, click the plus here, which gives us an object called target. Okay, And you can see now we have the points in 3D space, 100 by 100 grid. Okay. Now we have mesh, right? We have mesh data in this target object. What is this? Grid? I believe this is nothing. I'm going to delete it. I also can delete this collection because we're not using it anymore. We're not instancing anything in animation nodes. All we did is now is create a target object which has points, and we can use those points in geometry nodes. Cool. So let's go over to geometry nodes. And really the big question here is, does this work in the correct order? And the answer is yes, it does. So we're using animation nodes to create the mesh, and then we use that mesh in geometry nodes to instance objects. Wow. Awesome. Okay, let's create a new geometry nodes node tree here. And all we really want to do is we want to point instance onto these points, this shader ball. Now look at that. We have one object in here called target. This is still very fast over here because there's just one object in here. But we also have 100 by 100 of these objects. And we only have 11,000 vertices. We do have those 10,000 objects here in the scene because remember I showed at the very beginning that for some reason, somehow, these instances count as objects, although they're not in here. Interesting. So, and now the big thing is we can go back to animation nodes, and I can go, okay, I want 20 by 30. And here we have 20 by 30, or 10 by 50. And then we can stretch this out a little, so we have this, and then we can do this. Now look at that. Now we have really the best of both worlds. Like I said, we can modify the X, the Y, we can even add a C to it, right? So if I go C3 and I pull it up like that, now we have three-dimensional grid made in animation nodes, and it's all parametric, so we can always go back and change something if we want to. And we have this advantage of geometry nodes using instances, but at the same time having objects that are not visible, and it's all very fast and performant. Awesome. All right, so you can see this is just stuff that I'm playing around with to figure out how things actually work or seem to work on the inside. This is not the greatest piece of art or anything like that, and there's some crazy stuff out there already. You just have to go onto YouTube or Twitter and look for some of the things that people come up with, how they use geometry nodes, which is still, I mean, extremely limited in its, you know, the amount of nodes that we have and the stuff we can do. But there's some crazy math minds out there who actually take this to the next level. Anyways, I think this is also interesting to know how you can sort of combine things here, and that it actually works, which is surprising to me. And also looking at the statistics, how many vertices do you have, how many objects do you have, and like I said, well, in the outliner, as soon as you have tens of thousands of objects in there, it just becomes unusable, basically. So I hope this is not way too technical or boring. It's kind of important to know how you can get the best out of your system. And you can get the best out of your system if you use instances and you don't copy the mesh data, and if you use geometry nodes to create those instances. And with that, I think this video is done. If you liked it, thumbs up. If you're new here, maybe subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Chris P out.